As a fan of the franchise and somebody that was a big fan of Diablo 2, I found myself pondering and asking the question, was Diablo 3 a bad game? I mean, yes, for me, I was definitely disappointed with the initial release, at least after the first year or so. It wasn't the game that I was expecting, nor do I think it was the game most Diablo fans were expecting. Blizzard does what Blizzard always does. They add and change to the game's experience, and it's not necessarily always to what the players are asking for. I think this is pretty similar to what they have going on with Diablo 4, which is kind of the reason why I want to take a step back, look back at Diablo 3 before we look forward to Diablo 4. So here I am, at the end of Diablo 3, the final season, Season 28, and I'm finding it almost bittersweet. With all of my disdain for the game over its first year of its release, I've played a lot of Diablo 3 over the last decade, leaving the game behind, but eventually always crawling back and returning for another season. So, was Diablo 3 the game that ruined Diablo for many players? Or was Diablo 3 actually a good game? Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look back. Diablo 3 was released in May of 2012 for both PC and Mac. Later, it would be released on both Xbox and PlayStation as well, being the first time Diablo was released on consoles. Keep this in mind for later. Upon its initial release, Diablo 3 received mixed reviews from both critics and players. Some praised the changes to the gameplay mechanics, the graphics, and the sound design, while many others criticized the storyline, lack of replayability, and the requirement to have an internet connection to play. Post-release, Blizzard continued to release updates, trying to address some of the criticisms by adding some new features. These updates, along with the game's popularity, helped to increase the player base and improve the overall reception of the game. Diablo 3 was an incredibly successful title. It sold over 3.5 million copies in the first 24 hours it was out, making it the fastest-selling PC game of all time back then. By August of 2012, the game had already sold over 10 million copies. To say that Diablo 3 was popping off would be an understatement. While the game did perform well initially, its player base was decimated due to the lack of endgame and the eventual release of Path of Exile, a game that gave hardcore players exactly what they wanted. Alright, so I would like to talk about some of the things or some of the areas in which I think Diablo 3 went wrong. So let's start with the money. The real money auction house. When Diablo 3 was initially released, it had a real money auction house in which you could sell items that you found in the game to other players for real money. Okay, none of us wanted it. I can't think of anybody that actually did. In some ways, it sounds like a good idea. In other ways, there's just no way it was a good idea. Come on, man. We're trying to escape from real life. I don't need it in my video games. I don't need Richie Rich lording his paid-for, golden, diamond-encrusted armor in front of me just to cast me off into the shadows so that I have to go grind another pair of boots for this dickhead. I didn't want it. I don't think you wanted it. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking about, other than maybe they were like, oh, well, we'll get rid of RMT or something like that. Well, it didn't work. I found that this system had completely undermined the core idea of why we want to play ARPGs. I want to farm out loot that I actually want for my character for a loadout, but then I found myself hoping that I would find rare items so that I could strike it rich when I looked at the auction house and saw that items were selling for $10,000 or $20,000. It ruined the game for me. Man, Diablo 3 really showed just how much we value digital assets. I'm wondering if it was just a marketing test to see just how far our wallets would go. One of the other problem areas was the lack of customization. Some players, and myself included, felt that Diablo 3 just had really limited customization options, both in terms of character builds and itemization. I felt that this just really lacked depth. It didn't have the complexity of Diablo 2, and it just made it less interesting to play. The introduction of one-trick pony set builds really magnified this issue over time. While runes for abilities was an interesting mechanic at first, the gameplay just had these GG sets, where once you had them, your play was essentially finished. Personally, I don't think sets should be that overpowering. ARPG players crave uniqueness, and making it far too easy to become that broken and best in slot just ruins the overall fun of the game, and it really just takes away the reason for playing. The grind. Speaking of the grind, I'm actually going to go ahead and toss in a community concern that I've constantly seen brought up. Simplified gameplay. Many players felt that Diablo 3's gameplay was far too streamlined and too simple compared to some of the other games. Players were claiming that combat was far less challenging, and as a result, the gameplay was less engaging. Personally, I felt that Diablo 3, Vanilla, Inferno, and Hell were decently challenging content. I enjoyed the feel of combat in Diablo 3. I liked how the movement felt, except for on mouse and keyboard. The game was actually incredible on controller, but mouse and keyboard, anytime you got up against an enemy that was like larger size or like a boss, it was super difficult to actually try to navigate around them, which was pretty annoying. But outside of that, I felt that the game actually felt good to play, especially in comparison to something like Diablo 2. Now, I'd like to bring up the two things that actually ruined my experiences with Diablo 3 the first time I was playing it. That was the story and the end game. Specifically focusing on the end game because there actually wasn't one when the game first released. I don't know whose bright idea it was for us to run the same maps over and over again, kill the same bosses over and over again, but for myself and many other players, it got old real fast. We know that any ARPG is only as good as its endgame. How long are you going to keep me hooked? How long are you going to keep me playing so that I'm looking for better gear? Give me reasons to want to get better gear. Give me bosses and things to do that I need to use that better gear against. Diablo 3 didn't have any of that. And as a result, the player base slowly died. It wasn't revived until Reaper of Souls, when they finally gave us some semblance of an endgame. If you guys have seen my video, Diablo 4 isn't what you think it is, where I absolutely shill for Diablo 4, you'll already know that I was not impressed with how Diablo 3 handled Deckard Cain. I felt that his death was hollow, and it really didn't align with all the things that he survived throughout the years. No one deserves a death by butterfly fart. Besides that, I also couldn't understand how Soul Stones were turned into a MacGuffin. In Diablo 2, Soul Stones were powerful, however, they had limitations. In D3, they had the power to literally contain the almighty prime evils, not only serving as a jail, but then becoming a double MacGuffin for Mathiel to use as a source of power in Reaper of Souls. If Blizzard wants to change the lore, that's fine, but make it good. Diablo's story was always such a cool change of pace from what were normally served by game developers. It was dark, disgusting, depraved, and lonely. Diablo 3 felt fluffy. Now, Diablo 3 wasn't all bad. I think that's pretty obvious by now. It's one of Blizzard's best-selling titles of all time. I think it's at least in the top 3. And it's still widely played every season. Even this season specifically, when Diablo 4 is right around the corner, season 28 is popping off. And it's fun. It's genuinely fun. If you guys haven't played it, go play it. It's a blast. Seriously. They did an amazing job. And what they're doing in it is like a test ground for some of the things that they're planning on doing in seasons for Diablo 4 later on. And seeing like the Altar of Rites and everything like that, if they plan on doing that kind of stuff in Diablo 4, seasons are going to be sick. From here on out, I'm going to discuss Diablo 3 as a complete experience, both vanilla and Reaper of Souls. While Diablo 3 simplified many of the systems that existed in Diablo 2, I felt that the overall gameplay was actually pretty good and competitive with other games in the genre at the time. The combat felt fluid, skills had impact, each class was fun to play, the game was more complex than a single button spam, and the rune system made it relatively simple for you to be able to switch your build on the fly. Obviously, much of this would change with the introduction of sets and seasonal sets. Over time, the game would become a one-trick pony. You'd get your set equipped, or you'd run an LOD build, and you'd breeze through rifts until the end of the game with very little effort. While the overpowered nature of sets removed the glamour of grinding in an ARPG, I felt it became part of Diablo 3's success. Sure, it doesn't have the endless grinds of PoE or Diablo 2. However, sometimes it's kind of nice to just play a game and just, you know, beat it and go play something else, rather than feeling like there's always something more for you to have to do. I don't personally like to feel like I have to be chained down to a game. Usually I like to have one of those games, but I don't really like it to be all of the games that I play. Another strength of Diablo 3 was its sound design and its graphics. I know that there was some people that didn't really like the change in color palette. However, the game overall actually did look pretty good at the time. I think the zones looked really cool, especially the area with the demons from hell where they're all chained up at the bottom of the zone. Reminds me of Anima from Final Fantasy X. The music really added to the atmosphere in just about every area you were in, and once again, Blizzard knocked it out of the park with their cinematics. I think by now we all know that they still today are the king of cinematics. Okay, so arguably the best feature of Diablo 3 was its multiplayer. They knocked it out of the park with this. I loved the drop-in, drop-out nature of the game. I love the fact that I could have 3 other people hop in. We could all go run bounties in different areas, complete them all, and everybody get the rewards. I loved being able to do rifts or just run around killing bosses and things like that. I think they did a great job with that. Also, the couch co-op. I would actually argue that Diablo 3 is probably still the best couch co-op experience that you're ever going to have playing a game on the couch. Finally, let's talk about the major triumph of Diablo 3. The one thing that they got right without a shadow of a doubt. Something both you and I can agree on. It is the culmination of all of the things that I've talked about through this entire video. Whether it was the good changes or the bad changes, Diablo 3 was a strategic business decision to make Diablo accessible to a larger audience, and they absolutely succeeded in doing that. You see it in the initial sales numbers, and then you see it in the sales numbers over time as well. You see it in the hype for Diablo 4. Is it okay for us to feel shafted? Us hardcore players, or us players that were fans of the franchise before they brought in some of these new folks? Absolutely. Did Blizzard shell off and probably lose a ton of players to games like PoE because they didn't have hardcore content? Yes. Does it matter? No. Money talks, and in this case, Blizzard is listening. Overall, I think that Diablo 3 was actually a great game. No, it's not a great game for hardcore ARPG fans. It just doesn't have that kind of content. However, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a game that you can just pick up and put down. Something you can hop into for a season, get your set, and just be okay with being done with the game. I think when I look back on Diablo 3, I'm going to look back on it fondly. Not as a great Diablo game, but just as a good game. What about you? Hey, so I would like to thank you guys for watching the video. I'm trying to pump out as much content as I possibly can. I've brought this up in other videos as well, but I do work a full-time job, so it takes a while for me to get some of this content out. Again, I really appreciate all the kind comments. We're up to 3,000 subs already, which is freaking crazy. Y'all are wild. If there's anything you guys would like to hear me cover in the future, just drop a comment down below and I'm glad to give my thoughts on it. I plan on doing more Diablo content in the future. However, I do try to stay varied with the content just because I don't want to get holed up in one game. I'm going to try to do more like meta level conversations and stuff like that. So I hope you guys stick around and enjoy the content. See you guys next time.